The hearing room was silent except for the hum of cameras and the soft shuffle of papers. Bright white lights poured down from above, bouncing off the polished tables and the gleaming microphones. Every eye in the room was fixed on one object. A slim, blue folder resting just inches from Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's hand. Across from her sat Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, his jaw tight, eyes locked on that folder as if it might explode. This was supposed to be a routine oversight hearing. A check-in about judicial ethics and transparency. Nothing out of the ordinary. But everyone in that room could feel something building, something heavy. Crockett was calm, but her focus was razor-sharp. Kavanaugh shifted slightly, his fingers twitching against the edge of the desk. The cameras zoomed in. Every movement mattered. What happens when a lifetime-appointed Supreme Court justice is publicly confronted with a document he never expected to see the light of day? That question would hang over the entire nation by the time this day was over. The blue folder in front of Crockett would change the conversation around the Supreme Court and how Americans see their judges forever. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you do not miss our deep dive into this unprecedented crisis at the heart of America's highest court. Today we are pulling back the curtain on a clash between power and accountability, secrecy and truth. By the end, you will see why this single moment sent shockwaves through Washington, the media, and the Supreme Court itself. Jasmine Crockett had built her career by standing in rooms where the odds were stacked against her. Before she ever ran for office, she was a civil rights attorney in Texas, fighting for people who felt unseen and unheard. Her rise in Washington had been fast and fierce. A freshman congresswoman who spoke with the clarity and confidence of someone who had argued in courtrooms, not campaign rallies. Her questions were direct, her tone measured, and her reputation was growing with every hearing she attended. People knew that when Crockett had the floor, she was not there to waste time. On the other side of the long mahogany table sat Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Since his controversial confirmation years earlier, he had tried to stay out of political noise. He voted predictably with the conservative bloc but kept his public profile low. To his supporters, he represented discipline and restraint. To his critics, he was the symbol of how partisan the court had become. Still, even his sharpest opponents could not deny his intelligence or legal precision. That was what made this moment so unusual. Kavanaugh rarely showed emotion in public, and yet on this day that calm exterior was about to be tested in a way no one expected. The hearing itself seemed routine. It was an oversight session on judicial ethics and accountability. A chance for lawmakers to discuss transparency, conflicts of interest, and how public trust in the Supreme Court could be improved. The room was filled with cameras, reporters, and aides quietly typing notes. There was no reason to think anything out of the ordinary would happen. But sitting right in front of Jasmine Crockett was that blue folder. Thin, unmarked, and perfectly placed beside her microphone. It caught the light in a way that drew attention without effort. She did not touch it at first. She spoke calmly, reading from her notes, asking general questions about disclosure and public faith in the courts. Kavanaugh responded as expected, his tone practiced, his answers careful. He had done this dozens of times before. Yet the tension in the room began to build in small, invisible ways. A camera operator leaned forward. A reporter stopped typing. Even Kavanaugh's aides seemed a little more alert. No one knew what was inside that folder, but something about it made the air feel heavier. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm, the kind that makes people instinctively sit a little straighter. What looked like a simple hearing on ethics was about to turn into one of the most talked about moments in modern Supreme Court history. The blue folder sat quietly on the table, almost blending in with the papers and microphones around it. Yet for some reason it pulled every eye toward it. It was nothing special to look at. A plain government-issued folder with a small crease on one corner, no markings, no label. But its presence carried a weight that no one in the room could quite explain. Brett Kavanaugh's gaze kept returning to it. He tried to appear relaxed, but his eyes flicked toward that folder every few moments, as if checking to make sure it was still closed. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett began her opening remarks in her usual calm, deliberate voice. She thanked the chair and spoke about the importance of maintaining public trust in the nation's highest court. Her tone was even, but the words had an edge. She talked about the growing concern among Americans who felt the Supreme Court no longer played by the same rules it expected everyone else to follow. She mentioned that transparency was not a threat to justice but the foundation of it. As she spoke, her hand rested gently on the blue folder, fingers tapping once before pulling away. Kavanaugh listened with the polite, motionless expression that had become his trademark. His face was still, his shoulders squared, his hands folded neatly in front of him. When she finished, he thanked her for the question and began to speak in his usual measured tone. He said the court takes its ethical duties seriously, that every justice is committed to integrity, and that any claim of bias or private influence is simply not true. His voice was steady, almost too steady, like someone reading a statement rehearsed many times before. For a few minutes, it seemed like any other exchange between a member of Congress and a Supreme Court justice. But the tension was building in small ways that only sharp observers noticed. Crockett tilted her head slightly as he spoke, her expression calm but unreadable. The corners of her mouth tightened in a way that hinted she was waiting for something. On the other side, Kavanaugh's composure began to show faint cracks. His breathing slowed. His responses grew shorter. He stopped making eye contact as often, glancing instead toward the papers in front of him. Then Crockett leaned forward and shifted the blue folder closer to her. The movement was subtle, but the microphones picked up the faint scrape of paper against the wood. A few reporters looked up from their laptops. A cameraman zoomed in. She asked her next question carefully. She spoke about a discrepancy between what some justices had said publicly about settled law and what internal communications might reveal. Kavanaugh's jaw tensed. His lips parted, but no words came out for a few seconds. He eventually responded with the same practiced calm, saying that personal opinions never influenced judicial decisions and that he stood by every statement he had made during his confirmation hearings. But his tone had changed. It was tighter, more defensive. His hands, once still, now clasped each other a little too firmly. The room was quiet. You could hear the faint buzz of the lights above. The blue folder remained unopened, yet its presence had already shifted the energy of the entire hearing. Everyone sensed that whatever was inside it was powerful enough to make a Supreme Court justice nervous on live television. No one yet knew what Jasmine Crockett was about to reveal. But as she rested her hand on the folder once more, there was no doubt that this was only the beginning of something much bigger than anyone in that room expected. 3 weeks before that tense hearing, an unexpected message arrived at Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's office. It came from someone claiming to work inside the Supreme Court clerk's office. The message was short, cautious, and unsigned. It said there were internal documents that raised serious questions about the honesty of at least one sitting justice. At first, her staff did not know whether to take it seriously. Washington is full of rumors and most lead nowhere. But this message included something specific, something that could be checked. The next day, a meeting was arranged in a quiet coffee shop a few blocks from the Capitol. Crockett did not attend in person, but 2 of her senior aides did. The whistleblower showed up with a flash drive and a printed memo sealed in a plain envelope. Their voice was calm but anxious. They said the files were copies of internal communications from a justice's office, not obtained legally but preserved for the sake of the truth. Then they left as quietly as they had arrived. The aides sat there for a few minutes, stunned by what they had just received. Back at the office, the team moved carefully. They locked the documents away, scanned the drive for malware, and began verifying every possible detail. They checked metadata, timestamps, and email headers. They compared handwriting samples from previous public documents. Every step was taken as if they were handling live explosives. Because in a way they were. If the documents were real, it meant a Supreme Court justice had spoken publicly about respecting precedent while privately discussing how to overturn it. If they were fake, Crockett's reputation would be destroyed for bringing them forward. The legal risk was enormous. Congressional staff are not supposed to possess internal court materials, especially if obtained without authorization. Some advised her to hand them over quietly to a committee counsel. Others said to stay far away. But Jasmine Crockett had made a career out of standing up to power. She wanted to see for herself. When she finally opened the first file, she read the words twice before saying anything. The memo referred to strategy meetings about how the court could shift certain rulings once the public narrative softened. The justice's name at the bottom was Brett Kavanaugh. 4 days her team debated what to do. They consulted legal experts who warned of potential backlash. They discussed whether to leak it anonymously or confront Kavanaugh directly in the hearing. In the end, Crockett made the call herself. She would confront him in person. No leaks, no spin. She would hold the document in her hands and ask him face to face if it was real. When the blue folder was finally prepared, it contained only verified copies. The originals stayed locked away for safekeeping. Everyone in her office understood the stakes. If it was true, this could shake the credibility of the entire court. If it was false, it could destroy a young congresswoman's career. Every decision had to be perfect. And as the day of the hearing approached, the blue folder sat on her desk, waiting quietly for its moment under the lights. The hearing room was silent when Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett placed the blue folder flat on the table. The cameras adjusted their focus, the microphones picked up a soft thud, and every eye in the chamber turned toward her. She did not speak right away. She let the room breathe, let the tension settle. Then she slid out a single page, its edges sharp and crisp, and began to read. Dated March 15, 2020. Authored by Justice Brett M. Kavanaugh. Her voice was steady but slow, like each word carried weight. The memo, she explained, had been circulated among several justices. It discussed a long-term strategy for reconsidering and potentially overturning established precedent. She paused, looked up, and read the next line aloud. The time will come when the public will be more accepting of a shift. Until then, restraint in language is key. A quiet ripple spread through the room. Some leaned forward to hear more, while others froze in disbelief. Crockett continued, her eyes never leaving the page. The goal is to prepare lower courts for reinterpretation through selective emphasis on constitutional originalism. Once broader acceptance builds, full reversal can proceed without losing institutional trust. Then she stopped, turned the paper over, and laid it face down. Kavanaugh's reaction was immediate, even if he tried to hide it. His right hand, which had rested calmly on the table for most of the hearing, began to tremble. His eyes darted toward the folder, then toward the committee chair and back again. His breathing grew shallow. He straightened in his seat, then leaned forward as if trying to find the right moment to interrupt. But Crockett did not give him one. Across the dais, the committee chair leaned forward in confusion. Congresswoman Crockett, he began, what exactly are you reading from? Before she could answer, several Republican members objected at once. Point of order, one shouted. This is out of bounds, said another. The room filled with overlapping voices, a mix of outrage and curiosity. In the back, reporters whispered to each other, already drafting headlines in their minds. Crockett raised her hand calmly. This document was provided to my office by a source familiar with internal court communications. It has been independently verified. The chair hesitated, unsure whether to gavel the room into order or let it unfold. The cameras zoomed in on Kavanaugh's face. The once composed justice now looked unsettled, his lips pressed tight, his gaze fixed on the table. The lights above flickered slightly as the air conditioning kicked in, a small but noticeable shift that made the room feel colder. The sound of papers shuffling and faint murmurs filled the background. Kavanaugh adjusted his microphone and finally spoke. Congresswoman, I am not aware of any such memo. The Supreme Court operates with confidentiality, and any leaked or fabricated document should not be treated as authentic. His voice cracked slightly on the word fabricated. Crockett looked directly at him. Then you are saying this is false? He hesitated, then said, that is correct. She nodded slowly. Because this memo carries your signature, your formatting, and your initials in the margin. It matches your previous internal correspondence from that year. The room fell silent again. The tension was thick enough to feel. The gallery behind the press section whispered softly, the words March 15th, repeating like an echo. For a moment, no one moved. The question hanging in the air was no longer about politics. It was about truth. How could a justice publicly promise to respect precedent while privately outlining plans to overturn it? Crockett let that question linger without saying it aloud. Everyone in the room already knew what it meant. The blue folder sat open on the desk, a single sheet exposed under the bright lights, and for the first time that morning, Brett Kavanaugh did not look in control. Crockett took a slow breath before reaching back into the blue folder. The cameras zoomed in again, the soft hum of the live broadcast filling the room. Her fingers slipped beneath the next document, and this time, it was not a memo. It was a printed email. She held it up so that the committee and the audience could see the Supreme Court letterhead at the top. This one, she said evenly, is dated March 22, 2020. It is an email sent from Justice Brett M. Kavanaugh to Chief Justice John Roberts. The room went quiet again. Even the shuffling papers stopped. She continued reading. Quote, it may be prudent to maintain public ambiguity until the right case presents itself. Stability in public confidence will make transition smoother once precedent is reconsidered. End quote. There was an audible gasp from somewhere in the room. It spread like a wave as the meaning sank in. This was no longer a discussion about interpretation or ideology. This was strategy. Crockett's voice stayed calm, almost too calm for the moment. Justice Kavanaugh, this email was sent 1 week after the memo I read earlier. Your name, your signature block, and your internal routing code all match Supreme Court protocol. Kavanaugh's face began to pale. The once steady posture he maintained at the start of the hearing was gone. His shoulders tightened, his jaw locked, and he blinked several times before responding. "Congresswoman, that is an incomplete representation of any communication I may have had," he said, his tone strained. "There is context missing." Crockett leaned forward slightly. "Then please provide it." The air in the room was sharp. Reporters' fingers flew across keyboards. The chair looked uneasy, unsure whether to intervene or let this unfold. Kavanaugh opened his mouth but no words came out. His eyes darted again to the folder as if searching for an escape route. And then Crockett reached for one final sheet. This time it was smaller, creased and written by hand. She held it carefully, almost like it was fragile. "This note," she said, "was dated November 2020. It reads in your handwriting, quote, 'Now we have the votes to overturn Roe as we have discussed.'" End quote. The silence that followed was heavier than before. The committee chamber seemed to shrink around them. A few people in the audience gasped. Someone whispered, "He wrote that?" The cameras captured everything, including the instant Brett Kavanaugh's face flinched. It was small, barely a twitch around the eyes, but it was real. Every outlet watching live caught it. Within seconds it was being clipped, replayed, and uploaded across social media. Crockett lowered the note to the table and folded her hands. "Justice Kavanaugh," she said quietly, "would you like to deny that this is your handwriting?" He hesitated again, his throat tightening. "I will not comment on materials that have been improperly obtained," he finally managed. But the tremor in his voice betrayed the calmness of his words. Across the room, committee members traded uneasy glances. Some whispered to staffers. The chair leaned back, visibly shaken. Cameras from multiple angles focused on Kavanaugh's face. The contrast between his silence and Crockett's steady composure told the story better than words ever could. In the press room next door, journalists watched in disbelief. One network anchor whispered, "This is history happening live." On social media, hashtags were already trending: Kavanaugh Memo, Supreme Leak, Crockett Confrontation. The clip of his reaction, the half-second eye twitch, the flicker of panic, was looping on every feed. The air in the hearing room was electric. Crockett's expression softened just slightly, as if she knew the weight of what she had just done. "This is not about politics," she said, her voice calm again. "This is about truth. The American people deserve transparency from those who serve for life." The moment hung in the air like static before a storm. No one moved. The folder remained open on the table, its contents now visible to millions watching across the country. And in that silence, Brett Kavanaugh's gaze dropped to his notes, the color draining from his face. Every camera caught it. It was the moment the mask slipped, and the country saw what had been hiding behind it. The moment the handwritten note hit the table, the room erupted. A Republican member on the committee immediately raised his hand. "Point of order," he shouted. "This is an ambush. These documents are unverified and potentially illegal." Others joined in, their voices overlapping in a chorus of protest. Some called for the materials to be struck from the record. Others demanded that the hearing be suspended until the documents could be authenticated. Jasmine Crockett sat quietly through the noise. She kept her eyes on the chair, waiting. The chair's gavel struck once, then again, but the voices did not stop. The sound of murmurs from the audience added to the chaos. Staffers rushed between tables. Reporters whispered into phones, dictating breaking headlines. The scene looked less like a congressional hearing and more like the moment before a storm breaks. Finally, the chair's voice cut through the commotion. "The committee will stand in recess for 10 minutes. The gavel came down again. The cameras kept rolling even as the feed switched to wide angles. It was the kind of pause that felt heavier than action. Kavanaugh leaned toward his counsel, speaking in low tones. His hand was still trembling slightly as he wiped his forehead. Across the room, Crockett opened a water bottle and sat back in her chair, calm and collected. The blue folder remained closed now, but everyone in that room knew what was inside it. The reporters at the back of the chamber were already typing headlines about a Supreme Court justice under fire. The audience stayed mostly silent, aware that they had just witnessed something rare. As the 10-minute recess stretched on, the mood shifted. Everyone sensed it. Once the session resumed, nothing in that hearing, or in the country's perception of the court, would ever be quite the same again. When the hearing finally adjourned that afternoon, the real storm began outside the room. Within minutes, clips of Brett Kavanaugh's flinch and Jasmine Crockett's calm stare were everywhere online. Hashtags like #KavanaughMemo and #SupremeLeak were trending across platforms. Millions of people watched short, zoomed-in versions of that tiny reaction, the moment his expression shifted from control to panic. Comment sections filled instantly with arguments, outrage, and disbelief. Major news networks cut into regular programming to replay the footage. Some called it the most dramatic moment in a Supreme Court oversight hearing in decades. Others said it was a political hit job. In newsrooms across Washington and New York, editors gathered for emergency meetings. Front pages were redesigned before the ink had even dried. The next morning's headlines said it all. Constitutional crisis. Supreme contradiction. Justice under fire. Cable networks brought in panels of experts. Former judges and legal scholars debated what the memo and email could mean. Lawrence Tribe, the Harvard constitutional law professor, called the documents seismic. He said, "If verified, this represents not just ethical failure but deception under oath." Other experts focused on judicial candor. They reminded viewers that trust in the court depends on the belief that justices mean what they say during confirmation. Talk shows dissected every detail. Commentators replayed the footage in slow motion, breaking down the exact moment Kavanaugh's expression changed. One host said, "It is not just what he said. It is what his face revealed when the truth touched daylight." The clips spread to international media within hours. In London, Tokyo, and Sydney, anchors were using the same phrase, the blue folder moment. Meanwhile, a Gallup flash poll released that evening showed public confidence in the Supreme Court dropping to 18%, the lowest level ever recorded in the survey's history. That number became the symbol of what the country was feeling, a deep, growing distrust in its highest legal institution. People were not just angry at one justice. They were questioning the entire system that shields lifetime appointees from real accountability. Outside the Capitol, protesters gathered holding signs that read, "No one above the law," and "Truth over titles." Inside political circles, senators from both parties were holding private calls, trying to understand how to contain the damage. The leak had started as one blue folder, but by nightfall, it had become a national reckoning. By the time the sun set, the world had changed. The reputation of the Supreme Court, once seen as untouchable, was now being debated in living rooms, classrooms, and newsrooms across the country. The story was no longer just about a memo. It was about whether America could still trust those who interpret its laws. Inside the marble walls of the Supreme Court, the mood turned defensive. Within 24 hours of the hearing, Chief Justice John Roberts released a short statement. He announced that an internal review would begin immediately to determine how confidential communications had been leaked. He said the court takes the integrity of its internal deliberations very seriously, and urged the public not to rush to judgment. The statement avoided mentioning Brett Kavanaugh by name, but everyone knew who it was about. Behind closed doors, clerks were questioned. Digital access logs were reviewed. For the first time in decades, the Supreme Court looked less like a fortress of authority and more like an institution scrambling to protect itself. The message was clear: control the damage before it grows any larger. On Capitol Hill, the response was swift. The chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee announced new hearings focused on judicial candor during confirmation. Lawmakers from both parties called for answers, though for very different reasons. Democrats framed it as a matter of truth and accountability. Some Republicans framed it as a breach of confidentiality and institutional respect. Still, the pressure to act was undeniable. Within a week, a draft proposal began circulating in Congress called the Judicial Transparency Act. It called for stricter disclosure requirements for Supreme Court justices, including communication logs and internal policy memos when they relate to public trust issues. It was unprecedented, and many doubted it would pass. But the fact that such a bill was being discussed at all showed how deep the crisis had cut. Legal scholars began comparing the moment to previous judicial scandals. Some drew parallels to the 1930s court-packing crisis, when public anger over unchecked judicial power led to political reform. Others compared it to the 1969 resignation of Justice Abe Fortas, who stepped down after questions of ethics and influence. The difference, they said, was that this time the controversy was about honesty, not money. It was about whether a justice had deliberately misled the nation. In the weeks that followed, think tanks, law schools, and advocacy groups all joined the debate. Should lifetime appointments come with lifetime secrecy? Should Congress have more oversight? Should there be a formal mechanism to remove a justice who misleads the public? For many Americans, it was the first time they had even considered such questions. What had started with a blue folder in a congressional hearing was now changing how the country thought about its highest court. Trust, once lost, is hard to rebuild. And from that day forward, the relationship between the Supreme Court and the people it serves would never be the same again. For Jasmine Crockett, the days after the hearing were a blur of lights, headlines, and consequences. Overnight, she became both a hero and a target. Supporters praised her courage for confronting a Supreme Court justice in public. Others accused her of violating sacred boundaries and turning oversight into spectacle. Within a week, her office began receiving threats. Capitol Police quietly increased her security detail. Every time she stepped outside, cameras followed. Behind the attention, there was exhaustion. Crockett's team faced new legal scrutiny over how the documents were obtained and handled. Lawyers debated whether she could face sanctions for presenting them during a live hearing. She stood by her choice, saying she had done what the American people expected from those who swore to hold power accountable. In interviews, her tone stayed steady. But friends said the weight of the moment lingered on her shoulders long after the cameras turned off. Then came another twist. 2 months after the hearing, a short video appeared online. It showed a shadowed figure with a disguised voice claiming to be the whistleblower from inside the Supreme Court clerk's office. They spoke carefully, saying they had struggled with the decision for months. "I knew what I was risking," the voice said. But the truth belonged to the public. The confession reignited debate over loyalty, duty, and conscience. Some called the whistleblower a patriot. Others called them a traitor. The story had moved far beyond one folder or one justice. It had become a test of character, for everyone involved. Crockett's determination had forced a national reckoning, but it came at a personal cost. And somewhere in the shadows, the person who started it all carried the same burden. Both had chosen truth over comfort, and neither would ever live the same way again. The entire showdown left one question echoing across the country. When judges hold secret agendas, can we truly say we live under the rule of law? That moment when Brett Kavanaugh flinched on live television became more than a viral clip. It became a symbol of how fragile trust in our highest institutions has become. Millions watched a Supreme Court justice look visibly shaken as evidence of internal dealings came to light. It was a rare moment when power was forced to answer to the people. The debate that followed was not just about a leaked memo. It was about what kind of nation America wants to be. Should transparency come first even when it shakes the system? Or should confidentiality protect those inside the halls of power? There is no easy answer, but one thing is clear. The public deserves to know who their leaders really serve. So now it is your turn. What do you think should happen next? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, hit subscribe, like the video, and share it with anyone who cares about the future of our institutions. Every voice matters, and your support keeps these investigations alive.